Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about standardization. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, would you say that standardization of tools and frameworks impact the autonomy in a software engineering organization? Yes, yes, I would. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it affects autonomy necessarily. It depends on what we talk about. So the most important thing for autonomy is dependencies, I argue. So one of the things that I truly despise about larger organization is that they all are, especially a large organization, what they always do is that they say they're going to run DevOps, and when they say that they're going to run DevOps, what they mean is that they're going to hire a bunch of people who are operations people, and then they give them the title DevOps, and then they sit and control all the resources and all the logs and all the production system. They basically own everything in the infrastructure layer, and then the application developers have no control whatsoever over anything apart from shipping the code through like a pipeline, and then that's pretty much it. That's DevOps to every major corporation I've worked for so far, which is insane in my opinion. And that definitely affects your autonomy, because nothing is going to be as frustrating for your software developer and hinder them as much as having to have an ops person with them every single time they want to debug one of their system. It's the same thing with external dependencies. If you have a third party that owns part of your pipeline, like ticket systems or alerts or things like that, the more stuff you outsource from the team itself, in theory, you're supposed to be offloading them. Yes, that is true, but you're also creating dependencies, and those dependencies, if they don't work, if people are not working effectively together, they're going to start becoming bottlenecks very quickly and a source of deep frustration for some people, this one included. So that is the first thing I would say that impacts autonomy. But when it comes to tools and frameworks, if you were talking specifically about like coding related things, it doesn't really affect the autonomy, I would say. It affects the quality of the system. It potentially affects speed of delivery and things like that. That absolutely has an impact. And something that I usually argue for is that standardization of what I call the core tools is a very good thing. Full standardization is a little bit too extreme. So some organizations have what they call tech radars and things like that, where they have like recommended libraries and they have an opinion about every single little thing. I usually say don't do that. There's no point. What you should be optimizing for as an organization is, in my opinion at the very least, to take a look at, all right, what is the core stack that you have? If you have an existing system, for example, usually you'll see a pattern that there is a flavor of what people like to use in your organization. That is usually the tools that most people in the organization feel comfortable with. Now, that is very good depending on the sort of tech stack that you have from a hiring perspective and a maintainability perspective. The reason why I argue that microservices as a concept, or like the early days, I've said this many times before and I'm never going to stop saying it, the days are over when people thought it was a good idea to use Docker containers and running any web framework they wanted in that container, because as long as it's just a network connection between two systems and it's communicating over HTTP, right, then it's fine, right? Yeah, that is true until you have 13 different languages and you have to hire somebody who knows all those languages in order to maintain your gigantic behemoth cluster of microservices. That's why I argue that's why people stop doing that, because they realize that actually having maybe one or two, like having a very small, like a narrow scope of choices is actually it may not be the most fun thing for the developers who might want to experiment a lot. For some it is like really, really nice. I have to this day never met a .NET developer who thought it was super, super fun to have to work with a lot of other stuff than .NET. Same thing for Java developers and so forth. Not always, of course, people are different, but on average even the software developers like having a simple stack to work with. It's usually the philosophers and the excited people and the evangelists who want to work with more languages than one. And that is, as I said, that is very seldom the right choice for the organization itself. What I argue for is a tool-based or like a problem-based approach. I call myself problem-oriented. If you're going to make a pitch for another language or having more than one tool in a standardized setup, I will go as far as to say you have to prove very definitively that this is a good investment. And I find it very rare, extremely rare, that you can make an argument that there is a language choice or something like that that is going to objectively be the best choice given the alternatives, then usually the best alternatives for most corporations is going to be Java and C#. It's boring, but it's damn true. I argue at the very least. From a hiring perspective, it's one of the, depending on your region now, of course, because it might vary in some regions of the world, everything is about PHP or Ruby or Node. Like, you basically have to know your ecosystem. And what I usually say is that focus on that first. Because any programming language, any tool that you pick will be able to ship a web application. And unless you have very specific requirements on like performance or something specific that you're like, if it's anything that is not like hyper specialized in something, you really know why, and you can really motivate why you need this specific language for a certain setup, just go with the stuff that is most mainstream in your region, because from a hiring perspective, that's going to be a lot better for you. And that means that you have a larger range of people to pick from, easier resources to learn from and stuff like that. So your overall quality of the system is going to go up, which is something, incidentally, like a lot of the philosopher engineering managers and stuff like that I've worked with, they so underestimate this. They go and pick some like obscure language or some niche trend stack that, you know, practically nobody knows how to work with. And yeah, you're using a cool language and it might have all these benefits, but the problem is that you can barely hire anybody, and the people you do actually get working on the thing don't actually try, because I'm sorry to say that not everybody is a nerd, and some of them are just going to do good enough, and you're going to get a really shitty system because the language isn't helping you make a good system, and you have lazy developers or unmotivated developers or so forth and so on. You have to always account for the human factor. This is the reason why I tell the functional nerds out there that I would love to have more functional programming, but I'm also a realist, where I realize that most people won't go and learn functional programming just because. Most people will do whatever they're like, because most developers are doing this as a job. It's not it's not a hobby for them. So unless they have to, they're probably not going to in their spare time go and learn all this stuff. So you introducing functional programming or something more obscure that is cooler, trendier, better, etc., that is a risk that you are taking. Like, it's something you're doing usually for yourself, and unless you really know that this is the right choice for this company, you shouldn't be making those decisions, in my opinion. You should try to prioritize what's going to be the most stable and like long-term best investment for your organization. So what I want you to take away from this is that yes, standardization of tools and frameworks definitely affect autonomy, but as I said, usually autonomy specifically has more to do with dependencies, in my opinion. How fast can you do your own things? Like how many, like I like to ask people, how long will it take you to debug your production system? How long, if something goes wrong with one of your integrations, how fast can you resolve the issues? How fast, like that's what the DORA metrics are basically there for, in my opinion, at the very least. How is it for you to move? That's autonomy to me. And usually autonomy comes down to how many dependencies do you have. That's basically it. If everything is within the control of the software team, like real quote unquote DevOps, you're basically as autonomous as you can get. But when it comes to standardization, I'm very much for that, because basically from an organizational perspective, it is easier for you to deal with a narrower scope of core tools. So what I say core tools, I basically mean pick like a language or one or two maybe languages. As I took Java as C# as an example, this would be a very boring, obvious choice for any enterprise, for example. Because if you pick those, you know that 80% of the time you're going to have what you need to do anything you want as an organization. There's tons of developers and tons of courses and learning materials. Like, the ecosystem is super, super big. If you really have developers or like a system that really needs something specific, yes, you can like opt into that. But as I said, like you diversifying your portfolio, which is in our situation actually worse, because you're basically spreading out your choice. You're creating choices for things that isn't really necessarily a choice that people have to make. However, I warn you a little bit for getting on the tech radar bandwagon too much or things like that, where you get into the nitty-gritty details, where you basically force people to use like specific small tiny libraries and stuff like that. I usually say that is not really necessary. Get your most senior software developers together, have them pick things like, you know, a SPA framework, a programming language stack setup, like a testing framework, like these obviously, like this sort of bread and butter stuff that everybody uses in every single project, and leave like whether or not you should use that tiny little logging library or that tiny little utility library that does some arbitrary thing. Leave that to the developers, because that is not the major stuff. The bolder stuff, the core stack, as I like to call it, that's the stuff that you should ideally standardize on, because that is the thing that matters most. Most of the smaller libraries you don't have to be opinionated about. People are going to pick those usually up as they go along. So focus on sort of getting the big stuff in place and standardizing on that, if you want to make sure that your organization can hire new people, train new people, and that things can't, like, you look under a carpet or there somewhere and someone has like built an entire system in assembly without you noticing, and now you're sort of fucked because nobody's going to be able to figure out what's going on. Have a great day.